If you're an AP, or anxious preoccupied attachment style, you might feel like you seek to get your needs met a lot of the time. And maybe you have some success with that, but you feel like you aren't getting them met to the extent that you would want, so you have to keep asking. In this video, I'm going to talk about strategies for successfully meeting your needs as an anxious preoccupied attachment style. Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel, I help you with strategies and tips for healing your attachment style and making your relationships better. And I had a recent requested video where I talked about how dismissive avoidant attachment style individuals can get their needs met. And I wanted to make it kind of a series because while the overall steps for getting needs met are the same for everyone, even secure people, there are definitely nuances to the strategies that each attachment style can use to approach getting their needs met. So just to go through those general steps that are true for everyone, including, like I said, people with secure attachment, it's to explore and understand what your needs actually are, to make sure you are also able to meet those needs yourself in a variety of ways as a baseline in order to receive then from others to meet some of the needs as well, to reprogram your core wounds, which can play a role here with your underlying beliefs about the needs being met and your potential fears or blocks around that, and then finally to communicate these needs if you're seeking to get some of them met by someone you're in a relationship with. And again, while all of these steps are the same for everyone, there are really different nuances for each attachment style to make the best strategy for those individuals to get their needs met. So the general theme for dismissive avoidance was around believing that people can meet each other's needs. And the big theme for the anxious preoccupieds has a lot to do with that P, the preoccupied, which is the other focus. That's a beautiful part of APs, right? Like they're very giving often and very connective and other focused, but that other focus is the general theme of what needs to be addressed for APs to have the best strategy to get their needs met. Okay, so step one is to really get that focus firmly on yourself as you understand and investigate what your needs are. So APs are pretty good at this, actually. Like they're pretty good at going in and uncovering feelings and also needs. In a way, this can be a block already in a sense, because what I want you to do is investigate further. And so if you're already seeing where you're seeking something, let's say like validation or reassurance from a partner or affection, you might just say, well, I already know that. I want validation, I want reassurance, this is what I'm seeking. I can just see it when I'm interacting with my partner. But we want to go more back to the basics here, because I don't want you to already be thinking about how these are being met. We want you to get back to the basics so that we can open up other ways to get them met as well and really expand your possibilities here. So let's take some of these examples. It's common for an AP to have certain kinds of needs, and those include things like I just said, like reassurance, like closeness, connection, love and intimacy, validation, being seen, heard, and understood, things like that. And so, like I said, an AP might have some inkling of that if they are seeking reassurance, for example, or affection from a partner. And so absolutely, that's one strategy. You could look at what you're already seeking and write that down. But the next step is to understand what's really at the root of those particular needs. And that won't be, in essence, connected to any particular person meeting them. So these particular needs are actually, at their core, relating back to something that is our more basic human needs. There are 6 of them, but in this case, I think the ones at play would be the basic need everyone has for love and connection, for certainty, and for significance. So if you can look at something like reassurance and understand that it's a more broad need for something like certainty, that might help you to expand what the possibilities are for getting this need met so that you don't only seek it from your partner in a particular way. Likewise with something like significance, perhaps, being seen and understood and heard is a need for significance. So that doesn't mean that you don't want to be seen and heard. It absolutely does mean that. But if you can look at the real fundamental nature of why you want to be seen and heard and understood, that could help you to think about other ways to get the needs met, which is we're going to talk about in the next step. So what's a way you could do this? I would say just sit down and write this down. So write down what you're seeing that you're seeking from, for example, a partner, or ways that you see the needs that you're already seeking. Try to expand that out too. Maybe there's some that you also have suppressed, that are other needs that you want that you, because you're other focused, aren't even asking for. And we'll get into why some core beliefs can make people not ask for needs as well soon. But anyway, so sitting down and trying to explore both what it seems like you're already seeking, what you might be suppressing, and then taking each of those and trying to look at like what at root is it that I really want here? Not, trying not to jump ahead to the step of how to get it met, because it may feel the best to you to get it met in the way that you really want it to be met already. It might feel the most fulfilling, but we're not trying to look at that yet. And we're also, even when we do look at meeting needs, we're not trying to look for the most fulfilling. We're going to be at just ways to try to fill the bucket of the need in all kinds of different ways. And as you start to sort of figure out what are the aspects of this that are really important to me, like why do I want to be seen and heard? Or maybe you want to even investigate what flavor that is for you, because it looks a little different for everybody in terms of what would be fulfilling on whatever level for getting that need met. What's that flavor of it for you? So part of this is to take it really exploratory and like really let your self just write and maybe just brainstorm in a very loose way so that you can uncover things. And part of this is to really hone down and try to like take it, walk it back and decide with each need, like what exactly is at its root, and then how might that branch out into other potential ways of having the need met. Like let's say you thought your need was only to be heard by your partner, and then you discover it's the need for significance, and you realize, oh, well, maybe being seen also would be a way that I could have that need for significance met. Okay, so then moving on to actually meeting the needs yourself before seeking it to be met from someone else. This is step 2. Now you have all this information. So the other part of this, and I'm calling it step 2, but you really could do this simultaneously, because especially for APs, like I said, they often know some of the needs they're already seeking. So you could really do this at the same time as you're exploring more widely with what your needs are. But I definitely recommend to do the first step also. So it is to meet some of these needs yourself. So whatever these needs are that you have, what are ways that you can meet it yourself? And again, this focus on the other can make it difficult for an AP to realize that this is possible. They can turn it towards themselves and that they can meet their own needs. And again, I think one of the most important points here is to not be thinking the particular strategy I'm seeking for meeting a need is going to be the one that solves it. It's going to be the most fulfilling. It's fantastic if we happen to be able to get a need met that way, but it's also important to realize that we can have needs met more incrementally, like have them met in a bunch of different smaller ways that then really do have an effect on our overall feeling of having the need met. As I mentioned in other videos, it's also important to meet your own needs because you do receive better when you are meeting your own needs, because how we're treated by others is often very related to how we're treating ourselves. But one thing I did want to address here is this issue of the other focus. And, this is kind of true for anybody, I think, when you're trying to meet certain kinds of needs, like the ones for love and connection, the ones for affection. It's true that some of them can just feel like, how would you do that at all? Like, how is it impossible to meet certain kinds of needs yourself without seeking it from anyone else? So one strategy, of course, would be to try to seek it from someone else other than your partner. So maybe there's a way that you can have affection from a family member, for example, and you're getting some of that too. So it's not always seeking it from your partner. But I'm talking here also about actually meeting it yourself in relation to yourself. And so some of these strategies, you sort of have to try to believe, I think, but being with yourself in ways that feel close and affectionate actually can contribute to this getting your needs bucket filled in that regard. And so something like, you just have to think about, like, when do you feel a similar feeling to what you're hoping to feel from your partner? So that can be a really good strategy for how to figure out what your strategies might be. So if you want to feel, for example, like a cozy sort of feeling, like of affection, that kind of affection where you feel close and warm, what are other ways where you've ever felt that way to some degree? And so maybe it's that, when do you feel most cozy? And maybe that's, has more of a flavor of affection for one person. It might have more of a flavor for closeness for another person. It might have more of a flavor of security and safety for someone else. But what are the ways for you that you feel the particular kind of way that you're hoping that need will meet? And so again, maybe that's like really cozy in a blanket. Maybe it's having a warm cup of tea. If it's something that you're looking for, like validation, are there ways that you could journal and validate yourself? So try doing that. Try writing it out. So there's endless possibilities for how this could look, and some of them at first might seem silly, like I'm not like hugging myself in a blanket, like it may feel uncomfortable at first. But what you're really going for is to let yourself feel that feeling of receiving that need in the way that you're giving it to yourself and not worrying about the fact that it's not going to look the most fulfilling. You're just trying to add to your bucket. Slowly be filling your bucket in all these different ways to get the need met. And like I said, then that will help you in turn to receive from others as well. And it's also going to help you in terms of how you are when you communicate. That's in step 4, so I'm not going to get into that too much yet, but it will also affect the way that you communicate as well. So more on that later. So the next thing I want to talk about is working on the core wounds. So this is important because a lot of our limiting beliefs come from these core wounds. And so if we don't reprogram these, they can crop up as blocks. So for example, for an anxious, preoccupied person, it's very common to have an I will be abandoned core wound. It's very common to have an I will be rejected core wound. It's very common to have an I will be unloved core wound. There's others as well. I'm sort of picking these because they go along well with the theme of what I'm talking about today. Because you can see, if you think about it, that if someone's very afraid and has a core wound believing that they're going to be rejected, for example, then asking for a need to be met, I mean, that's definitely a possibility of when they might be worried that they'll be rejected. Like, I asked for my need and they said they wouldn't give it to me, I'm rejected. Or the unloved could also be an example there. Maybe they ask for affection, and if they're not going to get it, or if they're worried about not getting it, or they're believing they're not going to get it, then that is an example as well of the core wound creating this mindset and this mentality going in that's a block. And so there are other videos about how to do this core wound reprogramming. It's a lot to do with picking a couple times a day, ideally when your brainwave state is most receptive. For example, when you wake up in the morning or when you go to sleep at night, and finding evidence in a lot of different areas to counteract what the core wound is. Not going into that too much right now, but just knowing that it's important. And again, this is a piece that can be done continuously throughout this process. I'm talking about these as if they're steps, but really you can be doing this the whole time. And often this is foundational. Sometimes people have enough of a block here that they actually need to do it before they do anything else if they're really being blocked. So if you feel like any of these other steps were really problematic, like even investigating your needs was problematic, I would say start with the core wounds first, because that's going to be the thing that's blocking a lot of the time. And finally, the communication part, the communication to another person you're in relationship with. This is the part we feel like is the main point, right? But really, it's more of a final step. Again, you can be doing this communication as well as you can throughout, but the focus really should be first on these other things that are more self-oriented. Healing the core wound, investigating what your own needs are and meeting them yourself. So anxious, preoccupied individuals can sometimes feel almost like they're too much. They can tend to have sometimes a clingy style in trying to get the needs met, because they often are trying to get some of them met, like I said, maybe for reassurance or validation or affection already. But the key here is that once they're working on these other aspects that are more self-oriented, the sort of way, all these subtle cues for the tone, a voice that's being used, and sort of the whole energy of like how the asking is happening won't be so desperate. It won't be so desperate because the anxious preoccupied now realizes that they can meet some of their own needs, the core wounds aren't being activated, and so it allows the approach to the other person to just be much more matter of fact. If you're treating yourself like you're desperate and it's too much and you might be rejected in what you're asking for, it's actually very difficult for another person not to treat you the same way you're treating yourself in that interaction. If you're approaching it more of a confident, calm way, then they're much more likely to just hear what you're saying more directly, and it's more likely to go well. So mostly, this is, like I said, this is going to be from you having done this other work with the other steps. However, I do think that in the moment, and especially as you're doing the work, it might take a little time, you can still be working on communicating in a way that will be more successful. And I would say the best way to do this is to make sure that you are very regulated when you communicate. So checking in, do you have a desperate feeling? Are you feeling anxious? That A part, right, of the anxious preoccupied. If you notice you're feeling anxious, see if you can take some nice deep belly breaths, belly, chest, and then exhale. See if you can have any other ways, strategies that you have that actually work for you too, to be more calm going into the process. And if you're feeling that desperation, try to wait and not ask for the need right then. And one caveat here that's especially for anxious preoccupied is that if you feel yourself starting to go into people-pleasing mode or caretaking mode of the other person, making sure you don't abandon your own needs in the moment, right? That's a really good example. If that happens, if you think about it, that's a really good example of how we really are treating ourselves a certain way. And then that's what sometimes can happen with other people as well. So if you have the I will be abandoned core wound, and then in the moment when you're communicating a need to someone else, you essentially abandon yourself in meeting that need by not communicating it or toning it down or whatever it is you do because you're trying to already think of the other person, then that is something you really want to watch out for. All right, I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear from any of you anxious preoccupieds or people who are in relationship with an anxious preoccupied of any other topics you'd like to hear about. I like to focus on the nuances of each attachment style like I did in this video, as well as how attachment style and relationship interactions look like on the ground, in our actual lives. And so I would love to hear any other topics you'd like me to cover. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, I'd love it if you'd like, share, and subscribe, trying to get this content out to anyone it might be useful for.